Chris, it's an awfully long time since we overlapped at Tottenham.
Yes.
You look well.
Yes, no, I'm okay actually, and you are right. It was an awfully long time, but a good time.
Yeah. I was thinking on the way down, actually, I was thinking that I think Chris is a little bit older than me, so I did the old Wikipedia search, and there you've got a big birthday coming up very soon, haven't you?
Yes, I do, which I'm trying not to remind people of unless people remember it and remind me. So yes, a big one coming up, but at the end of the year. But yeah, looking forward to it.
You had a lovely playing career, very successful playing career. Highlights?
Probably two the biggest moments, and both very early in my career, was the '81 Cup final. I think one because of the way that we won it, the winning goal, which still sees Ricky Villa coming over.
It was magical.
Well, he comes over, I think, most summers now around about the FA Cup time. So for that goal, but it was also in that team. I think Steve Perman had been involved in a League Cup. Obviously, Aussie had won the World Cup. But I think more or less for the rest of us, it was our first achievement, first senior achievement, and first, whether it was, League or Cup or so. So I think that meant so much to all of us there. And of course, that team ended up playing together probably for another 4 or 5 years before it was split up. So that would have been certainly my biggest highlight, I think. And very quickly after that was UEFA Cup final, '84, and the fact that we had the second leg at White Hart Lane, I think made it an even more sort of memorable occasion. And of course, as a young player, you want to win things, and we was able to do that early in most of our careers.
I think it was fairly obvious to most of us that were around you at the time that you saw football in a different way, that you might go into coaching. Was that always an ambition?
No, it was probably as I got older as a player. I had some good individuals around me, of course, Aussie that had played in a World Cup final, and players that you know very well.
It was when you got older as a player that I knew you, of course.
Yes, of course. Well, yeah, not that much. I think there's only
a couple of years.
A couple of years. It depends how big them years are, I suppose.
Exactly.
But I had some certainly good individuals. If I looked at the early part of my career, of course, Glenn, but Keith Birkinshaw, who was a wonderful, forward-thinking manager, Peter Shreves, his assistant, who was excellent. But Steve Perriman had a big influence on me. Steve was an incredibly mature player, young player, and of course he was a few years older than me at that time. But I saw how he went about his daily life, the interest that he had in football, and the career I think that he wanted to have, and I learned a lot from Stevie. And so probably it would have been later in my career, probably 27, 28, that I knew that I wanted to stay in the game, but wanting to stay in the game and getting that opportunity is always two different things. And
it took a while to get that opportunity, didn't it?
Well, I was coming towards the end of my career in sort of the early 30s. I left Tottenham, had a spell at West Ham, which I really enjoyed. I then went to Brentford from then, and I think, if anything, that made me want to get into coaching even more so. Really enjoyed my period of time there. We were quite successful. Got promotion from the old third to the second division. But I'd never played at that level, and it was different. The training ground, of course, was different. The facilities were different. And I really enjoyed the involvement, and there was the manager at the time, Phil Holder, allowed me to do a few sessions with the team, and then I finished there. And then you're waiting, of course, for that opportunity. Where I was fortunate is I retired around about the January time, officially in sort of March. Aussie Ardiles got the Spurs job in the summer and took me back as sort of under 21 stroke reserve team coach. And
then you ended up caretaker for a while, didn't you, at Tottenham?
yes,
it was about 20 years ago.
Yes, on 20 years, and on a couple of occasions. But I was there a long time. I was my first season there. I was very lucky also to work with Patsy Holland, and Pat took the reserve side. And you know, one thing I think when you finish playing, you know, you feel I'm ready to coach, but it's completely different. And sometimes if you've got somebody that can take you under your wing for that period of time. So Pat Holland was really good for me, and he was a very, very good coach. But I then went on to work with, I think 7, 8 managers. I think if we include David Pleat in his caretaker roles, and I'd like to think that I've learnt from all of them.
Do you think the fact that it did take so long to get a major first team job, and the fact that you spent so much time with young players and as assistant coach at times, do you think that helped you prepare you for the actual role of the big boss?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And everybody's different. You know, I think when there are some, and we see it at the moment, of course, Stevie Gerrard walks into a very good job, Frank Lampard, and of course in our day would have been the same. You know, your Graham Souness's and so on. You know, going into big jobs. You know, straight from playing. I wouldn't have been ready, and you know, I have no problem. You know,
do you think you can be ready, even if you are a so-called one of the great players like Gerrard, like Lampard? Can you ever be ready for that job without lots of preparation?
It's the circumstances, because what will happen is that when you decide to go into management, whether you've gone in with the sort of background I had, which was a coaching background, and I was a coach for some 14 and a half years, or you go straight into the deep end, it's the circumstances. You can go to the right club, it works, your career blossoms and, you know, bigger and better things. You can go to the wrong club at the wrong time, and you're automatically taking a backward step very, very early in your management career. And so I think all the circumstances around that can really determine certainly your initial pathway, but sometimes, you know, your pathway and your future.
I suppose it brings me to another point, of course, that you've obviously spoken about many times before. Why do you think it is so few black players have been given the opportunity to manage?
Well, I think we're certainly going through a period now, and we're going through a period of certainly more conversation. And what I'm seeing now, of course, with even with the FA, where there will be a black and ethnic coach involved in all levels of their teams. I think we are at a different phase at the moment. There's no doubt there's a huge imbalance in the past, and there's no doubt that we've been through periods and have gone through periods, and I think perhaps in some people's eyes it hasn't changed so much, where, you know, black players were seen as good athletes, you know, good forward players, but not, you know, captain material, not managerial material. And
why do you think that view persisted?
Well, I think it persisted because of society, and you know, I was brought up in an era where it's completely different to how it is now on the turnstile. So I would have played in front of stands or away from home, certainly at particular places where, you know, huge sections of the crowd would have been giving me racial abuse. And it was something that, unfortunately, you got used to.
How's it changed? It's changed quite a lot, hasn't it? I mean, I remember the South, you know, bananas thrown, all sorts of things. I mean, it was dreadful, certainly in the 80s.
Yes, and particularly when, you know, there were periods, and if I think of my introduction into football and me working my way into the Spurs team, you know, I think at the time I was only the second black player to play for Tottenham, and when I played, I was the only black player in the team. And in fact, I think I was the only black player in the squad. So, you know, they were difficult times.
Not from the players, though, presumably, or
no, but no, it's certainly from opposition players. I know there have been numerous occasions where you would have had racial abuse from opposition players. their way of how they would have seen it, trying to wind you up, and so and what you had to do is that you had to work through it really on your own, because although you had a supportive team behind you, you generally didn't talk about these issues.
It must have been difficult at times.
Very, very difficult, but you coped with it because you had to, and what we saw in football was in some ways a reflection of society, but of course, when you get that type of environment, it magnitudes it even more, but I say particularly when, there's the supporter infiltrated and so, and so yes, that they were difficult times, but, any player that played through it had to have a coping mechanism. Some cope with it, better than others. Some, it's their level of play, and the better players perhaps were able to get through it because of their value to the team, and everybody knew the level of their abilities. But they were difficult times. The mood certainly has changed. What I seen.
I suppose there's so many black and players from different ethnicities now that it's less of a problem, certainly on the field, and less of a problem off it as well.
No, the changing room is different, and I think what I see now, of course, the older players, and we have a very multicultural changing room. From 25, a squad of 25, we've got 16 different nationalities.
Do you think football can help society in general cope in terms of
yes, because it can do, because it's so high profile, and if anything, it's getting higher profile. The Premier League is shown in new countries every week. So yes, I think that the game, I think, does have a responsibility, and of course, what if you are watching the Premier League in one of the African countries and one of the South American countries, what you want to see is an inclusive game, and not only black and ethnic players playing on the football pitch, but staff, managers, coaches.
Do you see that changing? Is it changing? Is there progress being made on that front?
I think in some quarters there's progress, definitely at grassroots level and academy level, and even here, if I look at the 4 years that I've, or the 3.5 years I think that I've been here, and we see a lot of the young players coming in to train, and definitely the background has changed that way. Far more black and ethnic young kids training here. It's at the top level where there haven't been the significant changes. Some changes, but there haven't been the significant changes, and changes mean addressing an imbalance, because there is a huge imbalance.
Especially nowadays, compared with the amount of players that from those ethnicities compared with certainly 20 years ago.
Well, there's no bigger example than looking at the young England teams, and when I look at hopefully a lot of the young players coming through and having great careers, and what you're hoping is that over that period of time, the way that the game is that some of them can become coaches, have good careers, can become coaches, and probably become managers. You
got your first real opportunity at Newcastle in terms of first team management. How did that come about?
Kevin Keegan was looking for a first team coach. The chief scout that worked there knew me very well because he'd worked at Tottenham before, and Kevin invited me to join him, and it was one out of the blue, which I must admit I didn't expect. I knew Kevin, but I didn't know him that well.
It's interesting, isn't it, that Keegan's book has just come out, and there's been a lot of criticism of Mike Ashley and his time at Newcastle with Mike Ashley. You were obviously quite close to that situation. Yes. Probably doesn't surprise you too much, some of Keegan's comments.
Yeah, well, I haven't seen the book, but it was a very difficult time for Kevin, particularly, I think, going back there for a second time, and you know, wanting to do well. Hugely respected there. I really enjoyed the period of time that I worked with him, and when you work with somebody that you don't know, you've heard he's a good coach or he's a good manager and so, but you don't really know until you get the opportunity to work with, and I can see why he was valued so much, and I can see why he was an England manager, and why players like Workton for him, and it was really disappointing to see him go.
But he did go, and eventually that led to you getting the job. How different is it going from being a number 2 to a number 1?
Hugely different. I still say that my experiences, I mean, I was a coach for, say, 14 and a half years, and I think that held me in really good stead to take over what was a very difficult situation. You know, the club had been relegated. We knew there was players that wanted to go. So probably the biggest responsibility I had at that stage was the changing room, and to make sure that a changing room for those that wanted to stay and wanted to help the club get promotion back to the Premier League, that I looked after them. And it soon became evident, sort of fairly early in the season, that there was a big enough squad there and big enough numbers that wanted that to happen. And it was just that guidance. That was probably the biggest thing at that stage, just because we knew we had good players, and probably we would have still been one of the favourites to get promotion. But we've seen it before. Teams go down, that everybody thinks they're going to come straight back up again, and it doesn't happen.
And at that point, was it an ambition of yours to be a number 1? Was that always
yes.
always in your mind?
No.
Yeah.
No.
Not always.
No, I think when initially I was a coach, and I say I was a coach at Tottenham for a long time, my main responsibility, and still is just to do the best job that I can in the role that I've been given. It was probably after a period of time, and particularly as I'd worked under so many managers, that that desire and that thirst to want to manage became greater and greater.
Yeah, and when you do manage, what's the difference in the feeling of a good result and a bad result to being a number 2? Does it matter more? Does it mean more being a number 1?
Yes, no doubt, because I think it's. I think it would be harsh, and I mean, I was a number 2 for a long time, and I think it would be harsh on any number 2s to say that it matters more.
Well, it's down to you more, isn't it?
What it does do, it affects you more. Yeah. You know, what I could always do as a number 2 was, you know, get on with life the next day. You know,
what are you like now after a game? The difference between winning and losing?
I'm not so bad. I mean, what I try and do is I try to try to be as balanced as possible.
Is that easy?
And no, it's not easy. It's not easy, and there is a difference. You know, there is a difference between, you know, playing well, you know, against one of the bigger clubs that you didn't, you know, people wouldn't have had you winning it anyway, that you got close and you finished the game and you're quite happy with how you finished the game, even though you haven't got the result. So there's a difference between that one when then you didn't play well. Too many players off a game that we was expected to win. It was at home, so there is a difference in your feelings towards the end of the game. But I'd probably be no different to most. That
I'm sure
I wouldn't be the best company after a game than when we've lost. What I definitely try and do is on the day when I have to be at it, which is if it's the next morning because we're in on a Sunday, if it's the Monday morning because we're off on a Sunday, then it's to make sure that I'm on it, and that's what you have to do.
Being a manager, part and parcel of being a manager is losing your managerial job. What's that like?
Not nice. I have been in that position. I chose to leave Birmingham to go to Norwich. So I've been in that position twice. Once at
Newcastle. You're doing well. Halfway up the league table.
Yes. Well, I think on the game before we'd played at West Brom, we were in 10th position. We lost that game, dropped down to 11th position. and then I lost my job on the Monday afternoon.
Is there a degree of bitterness about you losing that job? I know it's a while ago.
No, it's a while ago, and no, I think because again, it's about circumstance, and if I think when you lose your job because you haven't done well, results are not good, you're half expecting it, then I think what you do, you can doubt yourself. And amongst all the disappointment of losing your job, sometimes there's that feeling that you maybe could have done better yourself. And so I think certainly in the circumstances of Newcastle, where I generally felt that that we'd done well, that I couldn't have done any better. So it's a little bit of a different feeling, and of course I got huge support afterwards, which always helps. Norwich would have been different. It was a difficult season. The season before we'd finished in 11th place, which by Norwich's standards were...
Probably lifted the expectations too much there.
Yeah, and we all know that can happen. So that being the case, the next season was a more difficult season. We generally was never in the bottom three, but we had really difficult games at the end, and the club made a decision, and it was certainly hard.
Do you think you'd have kept them up?
I would say yes, because I'm confident enough in my own ability to say that. And but the club made a decision, and that's the balances of what happens at a football club. As a manager, you have to make decisions every day, and boards and chairmen also have to make decisions.
Yeah. Often people say about, Chris Hughton, he's such a nice guy. You can't be that nice to be a successful manager. I think even Mike Ashley or Newcastle use that as a kind of excuse. He's too nice to be a manager. What do you say to that?
Probably exactly what you've said. You can't be that nice, because... So
you're not that nice, really?
Well, I'd like to think that... I'd like to think in as many situations as possible I'm fair. That's what I'd like to think. But you can't be nice all the time. We have to make so many decisions, and so many tough decisions. Players that are playing well, that we all know we've been there. Why are you leaving me out of the team?
Do you find that hard? Or you got used to it?
No, I've got used to it, and I think the reason why I think managers at times don't find it so hard is because it's what you think, and if you're doing something different to what you think, but you're doing it for the right reasons, you're leaving somebody out of the team because...
Do you always tell them?
Always.
Yeah, I've read that about you, that you always like to talk to the players, where a lot of managers, perhaps people wouldn't believe that, but a lot of managers, you could never get to speak to them if you were left out, or there's some kind of what you felt was a wrongdoing.
And that's the choices. Every manager works in different ways, and it's one that it's one way that I've always preferred to be as a player. Certainly in the latter part of my career, if I was ever left out, then it's the way that I would have wanted it. And I just think that the relationships that you have with players, they're ongoing. So a player's out of a team today, you're going to need him next week, the week after. A player's out of the team for a good period. It takes a loss of form from somebody else, a couple of injuries, and he's back in the frame. And I think if you try, and it's not always easy, but if you try and treat players in the right way, in the correct way, and give them time, I think you can, as a team and as a manager, benefit from it.
Brighton and Hove Albion, 3.5 years. That makes you one of the longest serving managers anyway, which is
sounds very strange, doesn't it?
Well,
yeah.
It's mad, really, isn't it?
Yes,
it's that kind of job, though, isn't it?
It
Must be. You live from one day to the next.
Yes, and I think that's where the job of a manager has changed. We only have to look now at some of the best managers in the world, and what they have done is that they've lost jobs at some stage, and perhaps going back many years where managers would have been at a certain club for a long time,
Does it make it difficult to plan properly the future of a football club if your position is always fairly precarious?
The change in management, it's more managers are now thinking about the here and now, as opposed to the old days of Keith Birkinshaw going to watch the youth team play on a Saturday morning before the game in the first team game in the afternoon, knowing all of the academy players, and so it's very, very hard to manage them days. I mean, certainly here at Brighton, it's a developing club, and we have young players that are coming through, and I'd like to think that I've got a fair grasp on the ones that are coming through. But you have to concentrate on what really matters to a first team manager.
And what matters to Brighton? Staying in the Premier League? Is that the first and foremost?
Yes, it is. And for anybody that looks at where we finished in the division last year and think that you must want progress from, yes, we want progress as a club, but this is our second year, and what's more important is that we are able to grow and develop, and the only way you can do that is by making sure that you're in the Premier League. And thankfully we have a support that I think appreciates that, and that would be their priorities as well.
You got promotion, you got into the Premier League, expectations become higher, people want a little bit more, fans automatically want a little bit more. How do you keep those expectations realistic?
I think just by the things that you say, and we would be fairly consistent in the things that we say, that we are still developing as a club, and every time we pull out a big result, we beat Manchester United at the Amex, which was a great day for us. Most of the talk afterwards is about making sure that everybody accepts what it is. It's a great victory, but the next game's going to be even harder, and it's just about the things that we can consistently say. And when you've got two of the three teams that have come into the Premier League this season, that have spent the money that they have, that shows the levels now.
And also, if for those that got promoted the year before, those teams, you think they're going to be all right, yes, probably. So that's less teams that could possibly get relegated.
And I don't see that changing. I think the levels, I think at Premier League level will continue to rise. The new teams that come up will have a desperation to stay in the division, and I think that the spending powers will increase for every club.
Do you worry about the old second season syndrome? The fact that it's not quite as special perhaps as the first season in the Premier League?
No.
Is that something you have to manage?
Well, you have to manage it, but I think when I look at the facts, or when people tell me at the facts, it is actually not true. So, but it is something that you are concerned about, and what you have to do, and my concerns are, is making sure that the balance of either that second season syndrome to this is our second season, can we use the experiences of last year to make sure that we're better this year?
Do you feel like you've got a stronger squad this year?
Yes, I think I've been lucky in my time here. I think as a club we've recruited very well. I think we have in the summer, we have some players still to come back. So I think we are a stronger squad than last year. But we're playing in a league where everybody else is improving as well, and we need to make sure that we're ready for that.
I suppose it's better to have a second season to worry about than not have a second season to worry about. It's actually, to get promotion and then to stay in the Premier League, it's quite an achievement, Chris.
I'd like to think so, particularly when what we have got is that, if I'm looking at Fulham coming up last season and what that means to them in the Premier League, but they've had Premier League before, particularly ourselves, our first time in the Premier League, and of course been out of top flight football for so many years. So for us it's a bigger jump, for a West Broms that have experienced both, and other clubs that have experienced both, but considering this is our first experience in the Premier League, and as I said, out of the top flight for so long, it's a bigger jump for us. And so we have to be mindful of that and make sure we put everything in place to make sure that we stay here.
the three, I suppose, three of the longest serving managers at present in the Premier League. There's Sean Dyche, Eddie Howe, and yourself. Let's call you British and Irish managers.
Yes.
Why do you think it is that those, despite doing so well, perhaps the big clubs never ever go for those kind of managers?
There is no doubt that the Premier League, shows a clamour to bring in the best, what they regard as the best world managers, European and world managers, and the ownership of football clubs has changed dramatically. So maybe the thinking of a English or British owner of a football club might be different to one of a Russian, American ownership. So I think that's a big part of it. That's
Is it unfair?
I think it's unfair to the respect that we have some wonderful British managers managing throughout our leagues, particularly if I look at those in the Championship that have done so well, and it probably, we are at a stage now where for any British manager to manage in the Premier League, they're going to have to bring a team up as opposed to
like you all did. Is the part of you thinks I'd love a chance at one of the monster clubs?
No, I don't think that. No, and
why not?
Because I generally only think of the job where I am at the moment, and my ambitions are not to manage at the top clubs. My ambitions are to do the very best job that I can in the job that I'm doing, and if that leads to success, if that leads to people speaking well about you, that's nice, but more importantly for me, it's a responsibility to the people that employ me and a group of players that at this moment are having their first spell, ever in the Premier League.
How do you see yourself as a coach? What's your kind of philosophy, if you could describe it to us?
I like a team that's organised and prepared to work, hard for each other, and I think for me that comes first. And if you are able to bring in gifted players, which over these 3 years, I think that's what we have been able to do. It's more about making sure that them gifted players, fit into what we do here. That will continue to make us a better side. So am I a manager that wants to play over expansive? I think certainly if you are a club that is able to do that in this division, it's a.
Do you think playing that way would be a recipe for disaster for Brighton?
For us, yes. I think for those that do play that way with the players that they've got, it's wonderful to see, and they can.
That brings me back to the point a little bit about managing a big club with the big players and big stars to be able to play that kind of football. Do you feel a little bit trapped in the way you have to play at Brighton?
No, it's. I think it's a realisation is that at this moment we're playing in the top league. We're playing against teams that have spent more money, that have better players than us. So they're great challenges. So, when we pull out a real big result, the feel around here is the reason why you manage. When you pull out them results. And of course, the more often you can do that, the better team and the better club you become. But they're the challenges, and our challenges are no different to the top six challenges and the expectations of them. When the top six team loses a game against the likes of ourselves, then it's generally about why they lost and not why we won. So
how special is it when you beat a team like you did a few weeks ago with Manchester United?
It's what you work for, and we work hard here on the training ground. We always know when you get them type of results that things have to go your way, and generally if you're playing against the top six and they play well, generally there's only one result. So you need them to not be at their best, but you'd like to think that any result that you get against them is one that you've earned. And yeah, always a really nice feeling. And for a club like this, you know, that feeling lasts for a while around here.
Last question, what's your target this season for Brighton?
To improve as a football club, to improve as a team, and to make sure that we can go again next season in the Premier League.